Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Hardcore, the Human Design Podcast. I am Miko, and on the other side of the world, we have Celestina.
Hola.
For everyone that doesn't know, I am moving to Spain, so that's why people keep talking to me in Spanish.
Oh, that's really funny. I forgot you were in Spain / moving to Spain. When I said that, I was just embracing
Using
my
all your
American...
open centers.
Yeah, embracing my open centers.
Cool. Okay, well, that being said, our episode today is going to be about Drew Barrymore. You probably figured that from the title, because we probably named it something along those lines. But yeah, we have decided to do it a little differently today. Celestina researched her life, and if you haven't listened to us before, we both don't really follow celebrities, so I have no idea about her life. I know that she played in Charlie's Angels. I really like her as a person. She seems nice. I mean, I never met her personally. But the way that we've described her when we talked about her was that she really feels like a big warm hug. So we already had our assumptions of what her design could be, what her type could be at least. Also what her profile could be, and we were very close or right in a lot of these aspects.
We were pretty close. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, let's dive into her life, and then we're going to take a look at her human design and see where we see similarities. So maybe even in between her, Celestina, talking about her life, we can already take a little bit of an insight from human design as well. It's going to be interesting.
This might be the new model. Like, if we really like this might be the new model for doing this, because I feel like this could be really cool, especially with people that we don't really know, which is most celebrities. We're the worst. We're the worst at this, but also it's okay. Just gives us a different perspective when we're doing this. So
we're learning a lot.
Learning so much. Really embracing that one line in my Saturn return right now. All of the research. I listened to 5 podcasts about Drew Barrymore and her family today, so hopefully I can regurgitate it all here. She comes from like this dynasty, if you will, of actors in the US. So I think it was her great-great-grandfather came over from the UK to the US to pursue acting as a career, changed his name to Barrymore because he thought it sounded more dope. It does sound more dope than whatever his last name was. And he had several children, several generations of people. We're just going to fast forward through their lives because it's not very integral to this story. Nonetheless, her dad was John Drew Barrymore and had Drew with her mom, Jane Barrymore. They had quite a tumultuous relationship. He was quite abusive to her, and Drew kind of saw that growing up. But mostly it was just her and her mom growing up. So this was like mid to late 70s that this was all happening. Her mom was an aspiring actress and working in cafes and restaurants kind of just to get by for the first couple of years of her life, for the first couple of years of Drew's life, that is. In 1982, Drew had the opportunity to go in for a casting call for E.T., and she did her shtick in front of Steven Spielberg, and I think the scream, like her like little kid scream for like the iconic scene in E.T. that she did during her like casting interview was the scream that like nailed it and like solidified her in the movie. And that's really what started her career at the ripe old age of like 6 or 7, which is crazy to think. She gets E.T., has an amazing relationship with Spielberg as the father figure that she like never really had, and she kind of reflected back on that in one of the interviews she did on Armchair Experts with Dax Shepard, which is such a good episode. Highly recommend if you haven't listened to that episode, just to gain a better understanding of Drew and her story. Highly recommend. And also Dax just goes in really deep with all of like the people that he interviews. She had an amazing relationship with him. And that kind of started her on the path towards a couple of B movies after that, and like a little bit less well known movies post E.T. But she was on a worldwide press tour because of how big E.T. was when it was released. So she was already this super cute, charismatic, kind of like of her time, very similar to Shirley Temple kind of vibes, right? Like cute, curly haired, like big cheeks, big smile, super charismatic, and just bringing all the energy in. That was kind of the vibe until she was about like 8, 9, and her mom became her manager at this point. To get her gigs, her mom was bringing her to where the gigs were, which at this point in time was like Studio 54 and a bunch of clubs. Mind you, she's like 7, 8, 9, going to these clubs with her mom so that her mom can talk her up, can get her into different movies, get her different opportunities and different gigs. And her friends are adults at this point. And she also mentioned that she wanted nothing more than to be an adult and to fit in, because when she was going to school, she got made fun of for being an ET. Like, it wasn't cool to be in a movie as a kid, which is such a bummer. I feel like people just can be so mean out of like jealousy, and they don't know how to express their emotions, so then they're mean to other people. So she really found a clique, a vibe with the adults that she was hanging out with at Studio 54. And when she was 9, she had her first sip of beer. So she was like, wow, all of these people like have no inhibitions, like they're just dancing, and like I'm dancing at these clubs, but like it just doesn't feel the same. So she like grabbed a bottle of beer from the back of the bar at one of these clubs and went to go chug it in the bathroom. Obviously didn't like the taste of it because beer is super sour or super bitter, but she full sent, and that was the beginning of her addiction story at 9. The year following, one of her mom's friends offered her weed in the car. She was 10. She took a massive hit of weed, and again, she was kind of just looking for that altered state of reality, because her mom, yes, was her manager, but they had a very tumultuous relationship. Her father was very much not in the picture, and when he was, it was very abusive, both physically and mentally, both towards her and her mother. So it was just not a good situation. By the time she was 11, she was hanging out with older kids at her high school, because it was like a middle school, high school combination, and she was doing lines of cocaine, like, regularly. And then, like, went on a cross-country bender, like, with her mom's credit card, and ended up in LA. So it was just a lot by the time she was, like, 12 or 13. She had been put into rehab twice by this point. By the third time she went to rehab, it was her choice to go, because she had recognized that the life she was living was not the life that she wanted, and she really needed to gain a bit more stability and control over what she was doing. She really just wanted structure, right? Like, I feel like that's what most kids want, and she didn't have that in the world that she was in. Work was structure, and in that same interview on Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert, she was saying that, like, the work is what drove her. As a kid, like, that is the most seen she felt, that was the most structured she felt, and rather than feeling like she had to find that escape through drugs and alcohol, it was the work that fueled her. So I thought that was really interesting. This could be a good place to pause because there's a lot more that happens between 14 and 17. Let's look at very, very young Drew's life from 7 to 13 through the eyes of human design.
That's the perfect place to pause, because when I looked at her design, so first of all, what we can see here, we have a defined throat connected from the sacral through the 34-20 channel, unconsciously, however, and we have a defined root and emotional solar plexus connected through the 39-55 channel, consciously defined. She's a split definition. If you've listened to our previous episodes, you will see that a split definition with a narrow split, so meaning that only one gate is missing to bridge the gap, which would either be gate 6, gate 52, or gate 53 to bridge this gap. Means that they are often blaming themselves when it comes to challenges in relationships. It's not about blaming the other, that this and this and this doesn't work because you're not doing something right, but instead it is this and this and this doesn't work because I'm not doing something right. Neither approach is the right one. For a relationship, the best approach is to look at the problem and tackle the problem and not blame oneself or the other or one another. But that's a whole different story for another day. But this is one thing that we can see in her design. So she is putting the blame onto herself when things don't work out within work relationships, within private relationships, romantic or friendship, no matter what it is. She has a completely open ego with gate 25 and 37 pointing towards it. She also has an undefined G-center, an undefined spleen, an undefined ajna, and an undefined head. So looking at all of that, what we can see is with the undefined G-center is that the environment really impacts her a lot. And we can already see with what Celestina has explained that her mom taking her to such adult, grown-up events and places, that was a big impact for her. So she saw people around her. She wanted to also feel less inhibition or uninhibited towards life and her experience with life. And this probably stems from the undefined G-center, but it also is connected to her 4-6 profile. So her 4-6 profile means that as a 6 line, you're also experiencing a lot of the energy of the 3rd line, especially from 0 to approximately 30 years of age. So for many 6 lines, they experiment, they try things out, and in her situation, her being placed into these environments with an undefined G-center is creating a lot of challenges. So she is bumping into life right, left, and center. This is an unconscious thing, a physical thing that is happening as well. So that is, again, amplifying this, that this is her body is physically in these places and she's physically experiencing this bumping into life with alcohol, drugs, addictions, the adults in her life. So a lot of big impacts. And as well, she has an undefined or open G-center actually, which is also again creating this, am I really good enough for this world? What can I do to be better in this world? One big thing that Celestina has mentioned regarding her work providing her stability. So we're going to dive into the variables, and this is actually, we really didn't communicate about this, what Celestina was going to talk about, or anything like this. And I just felt I really wanted to dive into her variables this time because we have her exact birth time. It seems to really be very exact. As you can see, it's 11:51 here, AM. And also in certain platforms where it's more mainly about astrology, it says that this is the exact birth time. The birth time reliability score is very high. So let's assume that her variables are also exact. And the ones that I focus on all of them, but the ones that I wanted to talk to you about right now is motivation and perspective. Because she is someone that really needs structure in her life. And she also needs security. So in the motivation tone 1, you have security, which is a big, big thing for her. And even though she's not a line 1 in her profile, it still means a lot to her. So she needs to have a certain structure when she's approaching something, and she needs stability and security to do so. So for her, the way that she found stability was through her work, as it seems. And I don't know how stable she was in her family life. It doesn't seem there was a lot of stability there. I don't know if she was living in one home consistently. I'm not sure about that. So that can already provide her with a certain form of stability. But for her to really have it in her own hands, that's why she felt work was the place that she can gain that. I mean, she's under 14.
The stability piece, a bit about that. Her paychecks were paying for her and her mom to have a home. So with her second movie, she got paid 6 times more than she did in E.T. So there was a lot of pressure on her to succeed she had adult pressures by the age of like 8 to succeed and pay bills, which is crazy.
Yeah, really crazy. But it makes so much sense that work was so important for her, especially because it provided her with the sense of security. It provided them with a home with not just mental and emotional security, but also physical security.
Of that same vein, working with Steven Spielberg was her security in the adult figure piece of it, right? Like that, seeing that first and having a taste of that first was what she kind of expected the rest of her jobs to be, and how even though she was a kid, she could make different requests or perhaps even like suggest line changes like she did in E.T. However, that was not the case with future directors that she worked with. It was not the same collaborative environment that she had anticipated having had with Steven Spielberg. So there was definitely a lot more security that she felt and a lot more like parental vibes that he was giving. And I'll give some more references as we go continue through the timeline as well.
Also, a really interesting point that she felt seen and safe and secure with Steven Spielberg. So the motivation part of it, you can also see color 5 guilt and transference is hope. So within motivation, you will always have a way of how you should operate and how you should not operate. And this is something that will fall into place. It is not something that you need to make it happen, but it is really something that falls into place, and you will swing back and forth between the two the more that you work on yourself. So the more self-reflected you are, the more you're following the proper nutrition, and I don't really like to use diet because it feels restrictive. But the more that you follow your, in this case, determination, so the way that you eat in human design, then you follow your environment. So then comes the perspective part of things, and then comes the motivation. So it's really, you build upon a structure, and it becomes more and more subtle in the way that you're operating. So the motivation part of it as well, it's very important for her to fix things where she sees there's an issue. So guilt is an active way of fixing things where she feels something needs to change and where she feels that if she adds her contribution, it will improve. So this is another really great point with Steven Spielberg. She felt safe, she felt secure, and through that, she was then able to really make the changes that were correct for the role, correct for the movie, essentially, instead of going into her transference. And the transference of hope that's here, if you're watching, then you can, it's a passive way of going through life. It is well, yeah, let's see, everything's going to be fine, it's going to turn out well, instead of really actively making a change and making an impact. So that's how you can see I really went deeper into the variable, but I also wanted you, the listener, to see that even the tone is very important. When you dive deeper into human design, it becomes very important to look at color tones and bases as well, not just the line, because it provides you more insights. So how do I navigate life with my guilt motivation? And guilt is not feeling guilty. It is seeing things that need improvement and actively improving them and giving your input. But you can only do that when you feel secure, in this case.
I love that we have a pretty accurate birth time, and we can go a little bit more in depth here, because it's very rare that happens when we research a celebrity's birth time. So this is actually really cool. And to have so much detail about her life as well, as Miko typically says this for me. She's nodding her head vigorously right now.
Yes, I'm loving this. Also, you explaining her life and then seeing it in her human design. I love this. Okay, keep going
It's
with her life.
really interesting. So I'm going to continue, but I feel like her 6 line, right? Her 6 line is now like acting as a 3 line under 28 is condensed. We'll see it a bit more. But I wonder, because she started this like hardcore trial and error so young, if it was a bit more condensed. Because I feel like she got her shit together a little bit earlier. So we'll talk about that in a sec, and I'd like to see your take on it as well. 14-year-old Drew is freshly out of rehab and is doing really well. However, she moves back in with her mom, starts dating this dude who's 22. This dude, her mom actually really likes this dude. However, they have like a weird relationship together. Like her mom and this guy. And then even when she like breaks up with him, like they have like a continued relationship, and she's like, this is not healthy. Like, I can't be here. And her therapist is like, you can't be there. I feel like it'd be really like better for you if you moved out. So at 14, Drew basically files for like divorce from her parents. It's called emancipation, but it's basically like divorce from your parents. And essentially you have to like prove that you can like work, that this is truly what you want, and you have an understanding, right? And that's what the judge was basically just like, are you sure? Like, are you for sure that you want to do this? And she's like, yes. So she moves out, moves in with a friend that she had from rehab, and they just had like a really small, like 2-bedroom apartment. She got a job at a cafe, and the job was kind of like she was not great at it, like self-admittedly not great at it. And it was kind of like this novelty thing. She like said that the boss or like the manager like hired her because it was like, I guess, like a niche little thing to have a child actor making coffees for guests. Anyway, she met Cameron Diaz while working at this place. I think she said it was like called the Lounge Coffee Shop, but it was like quite the place back in the day. And they became really good friends. So Cameron Diaz came in one day and she's like, yo, are you gonna like go to this casting call this afternoon? And she's like, nah, I gotta work. And her boss is like, I think you should take this opportunity. Basically being like, you suck at making lattes, go live your dream. And she just like gave him the apron. She's like, you know what, you're right. And then just like started auditioning. That's the word I've been looking for this whole time. Audition. Jesus Christ.
I just googled it and I was like, oh yeah, I know. But yeah, you intercepted it with your mind. Undefined head in Ajna.
I love that we can do that. At this point then she like left her job, started hardcore auditioning for a variety of different parts, and then started getting some kind of like scandalous parts, right? She really embraced the like Hollywood bad girl external vibes, like started wearing black, like leather, just was like doing nude scenes, was doing like cover shoots of magazines, like half nude, half not. And this was through her teens. Like, she's in her mid-teens at this point and is really embracing this like bad girl lifestyle. She got together with this one dude and they were married. I think she proposed on like day 6, and then they immediately got married that day as well, and then divorced 51 days later. Dude, tell me this isn't a 6-line in their 3-line phase, doing all of the things. Oh my God. I think one big thing to note here is during her nude cover shoot, Steven Spielberg sent her the cover back. They had photoshopped it so there was clothing on her, and he also sent her a blanket that had embroidered on it, cover up. So I feel like that is a genuine person who cares about her, right? Like, that's something a parent would do. So I think that that's also really important to hark back to. And she even said in the Dax Shepard interview that their relationship, like, they jokingly say, like, she was his first kid. So they genuinely do have that, like, father-daughter relationship, which I think is really special and probably very much what she needed. We're going to break in her late teens, early 20s, where she's Hollywood's bad girl. and not landing parts.
Her actual biological father wasn't really in her life, right?
At this point, he would call and ask for money. And that was another thing that she had to like role play through in therapy. She couldn't get her like actual dad on the phone, like in therapy. And one of the therapists in rehab was like pretending to be her dad, and she had to like work through how to say no if he was asking for money. So her biological father in her life, it was physically abusive if he was in her life or asking for money. He was also an addict himself, so he didn't really know how to have a relationship with her in that capacity.
That's very sad. Well, let's see what happens with that relationship later down her life. I don't know if anything changes there, but what we can see in her human design with that undefined spleen. So an undefined spleen has a tendency to hold on to things that aren't good for her. And I would also be interested to see his chart, but what may have happened here is that he has a defined spleen, and that's why it was additionally very difficult for her to say no. It's one of the hardest things to learn, to say no with an undefined spleen, especially if the other person has a defined spleen, or maybe you're even defining the spleen together. So she has a few gates coming out of it, 18, 28, and 50. So there's quite a potential for her to define it with her father. What I find interesting every time I see such a chart, so we have a manifesting generator. And a manifesting generator means that the sacral is connected to the throat, or a motor is connected to the throat, and the sacral is defined. In this case, we have the sacral directly being connected to the throat through the 3420, but it's unconscious. So this is an extremely fast knowing in the now. And however, we also have an emotional manifesting generator. So her emotional solar plexus is defined through the individual wave. And with that, she is prone to melancholy. So she is someone that falls into melancholic moments. So she falls very deeply, and she also rises very highly. So she has those melancholic moments, but she also has those hyper highs. Some people may feel like this is manic depressive. This can be something that would, in clinical terms, be defined as manic depressive. It doesn't mean that she is that, but in human design, we look at it from falling deeply into a hole, into the melancholic hole, and then also being on these absolute highs. Usually the individual wave is quite mellow, it's quite steady, but with these highs and lows, just dipping into that quite steady and mellow being. And what I find so fascinating about this with the emotional solar plexus defined is that she still needs to take her time to wait for clarity. So on one hand, on the unconscious side, she has this, I need to make a decision right now. And on the other side, on the conscious aspects, thankfully for her, this is conscious. Her emotional solar plexus is consciously defined. So she has more of an inkling to wait for clarity to make decisions. However, this process, this feeling torn inside of yourself, one side saying, hey, I need to make a decision right now, quickly, in the moment, and on the other side, needing to wait for clarity to make decisions. The way that you navigate this, if this is your design, is by waiting out your emotional wave for major decisions. So when you're taking smaller decisions, day-to-day decisions of what do I want to eat, you can use the unconscious channel 3420. And this is really, I'm specifically talking about exactly this connection, 3420, in combination with an emotional solar plexus being defined. No matter if the individual, tribal, or collective wave, but just having an emotional solar plexus defined. In this combination, you wait for clarity for major, important, life-changing decisions, and you can occasionally, with decisions that aren't that vital, so for example, what do we want to eat right now, you can go with your gut, with your in the now decision-making process. So I find that always very, very interesting when I have an individual like this in front of me, someone's chart in front of me like that. It can feel very torn, and she's a split definition. So additionally, she really needs the time to feel into what feels right and let it process through her body, through those two splits within her.
Continuing a bit more of her life story. By this time, she's been married and divorced, has had a couple of more tumultuous relationships, and just to give you guys a timeline, it is 1995, right about this time. And this is when she starts changing her vibe from Hollywood's bad girl. She's not landing the roles that she wants as that. And she was on a late night show in the 1990s and wearing this like blue crop top, jeans, like very mid 1990s vibe. And the host, who slips my mind, insert 1990s equivalent of Jimmy Fallon or whatever into there. And he was like, oh, like, I heard that, like, you just want to, like, party and dance. And she's like, yeah. So the band starts playing. She gets up on his desk, like, dances and then flashes him. And then, mind you, she's, like, on, like, a press tour, like, for her new movie. And all he does is, like, ask her about her shenanigans. And that's the turning point. Like, that was the click, like, oh, they only care, like, about what I'm doing as a person and not as an actor. They're not seeing my work for the value that it holds, and that's concerning. That was the shift to change her outward appearance and her actions from Hollywood's bad girl to, okay, I think I need to focus on my work a bit more seriously. And this is why I asked you, Miko. I wonder if she had that switch a little bit earlier because her trial and error was so hardcore, so young for an extended period of time. So this aha moment came in like her early 20s. And at this point, she was starting to reach out to fellow comedians, fellow actors around her age. And the first comedian she reached out to was Adam Sandler. And she's like, I love you. I think we should do a movie together. And I think you'd be great in like a rom-com. So that was actually the impetus for The Wedding Singer. And it didn't happen immediately, but they were also in several movies after that together, which I think is so cool, so beautiful. And at this same point in time, right? So now we're in her like mid-20s-ish. She's starting a production company and like genuinely wanted to be a producer. And she went in with her friend Nancy, who happens to now be Jimmy Fallon's wife, and like they're besties, and like their two families are besties. But kind of going back to the late 90s, these two ladies started a production company and produced Charlie's Angels, Never Been Kissed, and I think most notably from that was Fever Pitch, which actually stars Jimmy Fallon in the movie as well. So it was just this very interesting shift that, again, I'm seeing happen a bit earlier than her Saturn return in 2003. A lot of this was happening in like the late 90s, so her like 22 to like 27 phase, which I just think is interesting. So she really, in this time period, turned that bad girl model around. And in my mind, this is what I remember as a kid, like watching these Drew Barrymore movies and just being like, oh my God, she's awesome. I didn't even know about like the Hollywood bad girl side. So I think that that's really interesting. The very little bit that I knew she had a very tumultuous childhood. And I have just seen like the amazing rom-coms that she's produced and has starred in. What are your thoughts up to this point?
I didn't know she produced Charlie's Angels. I think that movie is amazing. Also, the energy between those three ladies, it's fantastic. The casting also makes sense if she's friends with
Cameron Diaz and Lucy Liu.
Yeah, that one. So I love the energy between those three. It's fantastic. So yeah, I didn't know she produced that. But returning to the return, I can relate to it from my own experience. So I'm someone who also, I feel like the switch was at 23, 24 for me. This was really the moment where I started to change my diet. I started to study for the health practitioner. I started to drink less alcohol. I had already stopped smoking. So for everyone that doesn't know, I smoked for 7 years of my life, and I stopped when I was 19. Don't do the calculation. But it was also a very, very wild childhood, teenage years. And I think I can very much relate to her process. I don't know why that is happening. And I also don't feel like me personally, I had my S together by the time I was 24. But this was the starting point, and it took quite some time before this whole transformation happened. And I feel like this may be the 7-year process. So it's said that within 7 years, your whole body has renewed, all the cells in your body have renewed. That is not true, by the way. For everyone that still believes that, that is not true. But we have this in traditional Chinese medicine that this 7 years of your life is always an important marker. So you have 0 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21, etc. And you also have a certain time frame in which it makes sense to have kids. So that would be 21 to 28, according to Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. These days, everything is very, very different. But that is thought to be the best time to reproduce. I'm going into a very different direction right now. However, what I'm trying to say here is that basically I feel like this was a shift for me personally that happened with 23, 24, and it continued onwards. I mean, it's still continuing, but I really felt like it took around 7 years to be something that I live by, and that was part of who I was. The whole transformation period was much faster, but if I look at it from hindsight, it makes sense to me that it was a 7-year process. And I think that this is also what happened to her. There was this initial spark, this is the moment that I realized, that I recognized something needs to change. And that was for me as well. Something happened where I was like, okay, something needs to change. And then it did start more or less drastically, but it was still something that was progressing as well. And it wasn't a cold turkey cutting off every bad habit and just changing everything all at once, but it was a progressive thing. So I think for me, from a personal experience, that makes sense for her as well, that we've just gone very crazy in a lot of ways when we were teenagers, and we may have had this switch earlier on, but maybe this is just a normal process as well. Normally, the reason why Celestina is asking this question is that normally around your Saturn return, so around 30, you will have a certain date for your Saturn return. And for her, in Drew Barrymore's case, you can see that it's the 23rd of September 2003. I'm not sure which age she was at that point. I'm not going to try to do the maths because I'm not good at maths. So
28.
Thank you. Great. I was hoping you would jump in. Always having my back. Thank you. So 28. For her, it was 28. So calculating backwards, 3 years before that is approximately 25. So for her, this shift started with around 25. And apparently it started with her a bit earlier. But I think my Saturn return is also actually at 28. So that may make sense why it's starting a bit earlier as well. So you say in human design that a Saturn return starts working 3 years before, approximately 3 years before. It can start a little earlier, a little later, but approximately 3 years before the process starts, and it ends approximately 3 years past. However, a Saturn return impact, So this is just the time frame where you feel this major change happening. But the Saturn return energy is going to last until your Uranus opposition and sometimes even until your Chiron return. So that's just another added theme to it. And I can see that her Chiron return was on May 10th. So just recently this year.
So she was actually married again before her Saturn return. So she got married twice before her Saturn return. Obviously, neither of them stuck. Then it was more of a full-on into acting, into producing, and her husband, her former husband, were married in 2012. And a couple of months later, it was a very small wedding, right? Third one, keep it small kind of situation. She ended up having her first daughter, I think 6 months after their wedding. So a little bit pregnant during the wedding. And then 2 years later, they had another child together. In 2016, though, they were divorced, and she mentioned in an interview that this was a very challenging decision because she didn't want her daughters growing up in a divorced household. And coming from the tumultuous childhood that she had, this was a very challenging decision that she had to make. But she was also just like, I can't be unhappy. Like, that's not healthy for them to see. And us sticking this out for them isn't healthy, right? So, like, that was their thought process. They had quite an amicable divorce. And the podcast that I listened to was in 2021. So I believe since then, he's remarried. They're co-parenting quite well, quite nicely. And she's very adamant about keeping her kids out of the spotlight. She also said that she felt like she didn't truly have meaning in her life until her kids were born. So I'd be very interested to see. There's no information on her kids, like, at all on the interwebs, but I'd be very interesting to see the relationship of their designs with Drew's. I wonder if it would be similar to what we experienced in the Princess Diana episode, where she had such a beautiful relationship with her boys and their designs complemented each other so uniquely. So I don't know, I'm stretching now, but I wonder if that's kind of the feeling that she has with her girls. And if so, that's beautiful. That's awesome. But she did say that, like, she really didn't have her life together until these girls were born, and, like, didn't really have direction until then. So she stopped working a ton when they were born, and post divorce, I recall her saying she was in a really bad place and went back to drinking and just not being her best self, but then recognized probably within a year of that that's not the most ideal thing for her girls to see. That's not the most ideal thing for her. And she went back into the limelight, but through a different lens, if you will. So rather than being in movie after movie where the hours are grueling, which is why she kind of toned it back a little bit when her girls were born, she now hosts a talk show. So since 2020, she has hosted the Drew Barrymore show. I think they just call it the Drew show. And this, like, watching her interview people is actually what sparked this conversation and, like, the desire for this conversation that we are currently having. How meta. But I am just so, I've watched a lot of talk shows, like, in my day, right? Like, my nonna was, like, a talk show watcher, and I've watched a ton, but she really gets down to the nitty gritty with the people that she interviews. She, like, takes her shoes off, like, sits on a couch, and it's not separate couches. If you've ever watched her as an interviewer, they're literally on the same couch together, like gal pals. And I think it really breaks down the barriers of interviewer interviewee, where you're just, like, sitting on the couch with them while they're having a conversation. And I think that's beautiful. So she actually said in the Dax Shepard interview that each person that she talks to has 45 minutes to talk. So, like, they do those separately, and those are filmed separately and then edited together before they're, like, released in one whole 1 hour long episode or 45-minute long episode, whatever. But that totally makes sense, that they have 45 minutes with each other to get deep into that nitty gritty, and then she can determine post facto, like in post, what is like what she wants to show from this conversation in this interview. And that makes sense as to why it looks and feels so deep. It's because they go so much deeper in 45 minutes than you can in a typical 8-minute live interview sesh. And they break down so many more barriers together. And it's just really beautiful to see. Yeah, that's a little bit behind the scenes of what I learned. And I think just makes me appreciate more the charisma that she brings and also what she is able to bring out of people. And in not like a schmutzy like car salesman way, but in like such a genuine big hug kind of way. Like the energy that a manifesting generator gives off. So cool.
Oh my god, that makes so much sense. So, let me explain. I have gone into the asteroids. Of course. I mean, I couldn't resist. And in her asteroids, you will see. So I focused on a few different areas. I looked at gate 59 because this is her conscious Earth. I looked at her 3420. I looked at especially the 59-6 channel, because this is really about breaking down walls, and it's also a very fertile channel, but not just for making babies, but actually for creative projects as well. I wanted to know what is happening specifically in this, because it would bridge her gap, the 59-6, and it provides her with a single definition, and it also provides her with this caring energy. So let me explain a little bit. We have the 59th gate, which is about intimacy and breaking down walls. This is a very big theme for the 59, and this is her Earth. So this is what her conscious Earth. This is what makes her feel grounded. She also has the 55th gate in her conscious Sun, which is about the spiritual aspects in life as well. So she has the 3955 full channel connecting, and that is about provoking others into reaching a certain type of transformation. So it's a provocative energy. And if the person that is sitting opposite you is not for you, or if you're connecting with someone and that person is not for you, they are not going to be able to handle your provocation. And that also means that they're not going to help you elevate to a next level, to connect with spirit, with source, and your authentic self, essentially. But you're also not going to be able to impact them in that way as well. And she has in her 59, so let me return back to her Earth, because I really find that channel very interesting, especially for her. So in her 59th gate, she has her conscious Earth, Hecate and Arnica. She has Hillary, and she has in her 6th gate, Magdalena, Deucalion, in both conscious and unconscious, and Sophia. Those asteroids are so fascinating because Hecate and Arnica are both asteroids that are about a healing approach. They bring wisdom, they bring intimacy, and it's really about the depth of intuition in relationships. It helps, these asteroids help guide others and also herself through transformative emotional experiences. So sitting on this couch with them, being so intimate and close, not only physically sitting close by, but also going into depth, uncovering what needs changing, as we've talked about already in the motivation variable. What can we do to improve each other, to improve our relationship? And she's really a fantastic guide in a lot of aspects as well. The 6th gate, which is about boundaries and conflict resolution, with Magdalena, Deucalion, and Sophia. So again, a lot of wisdom in this with Sophia. If you know Greek, Sophia means wisdom and clarity. The Deucalion is again about transformation, but being very resilient in this process. And that gives her strength to navigate emotional challenges, but also seek resolution within these conversations. So she's really good at exactly what you're describing. No surprise there. But that's probably also why she's so intriguing to the listener, because she's not just dabbling on the surface, but she really goes deep, breaks down walls, and also has this energy from the sixth gate, which is very caring, very nurturing. She holds space for deep healing. There's an honoring of her own integrity as well, but also of the person that is opposite her. So while at the same time she's able to hold this space for the other, she also has clear boundaries, which ones she doesn't want anyone to pass. And that also probably is connected to her past, because if she doesn't have that, it's easy for her to fall back as well. So she needed to do a lot of self-work. She needed to have a lot of clarity in how to navigate the world accordingly so that she doesn't fall back into these challenges. So that's just a little bit about the asteroid part, but I felt it was just really fascinating when I was looking into it.
Dude, it's so cool to see all of that. It's always just so cool to see people's lives in a chart that looks wild and crazy, but it really is you in a neat little package. So it's really cool to be able to see her journey and how she's progressed. And I'm sure there was a lot of conditioning that she had to break through to get there, right? Like, this was probably not an easy process, but being able to lean into who she truly is just so beautiful, because the way she impacts people is so cool. And the voice that she allows people to have, I think, on her show is so cool.
Yeah, I feel like I need to watch one of her shows. I've never watched any of her shows, but the only thing that you told me, and this is, as Celestina said, that's why we went down this rabbit hole, was because you said that she's taking off her shoes, sitting down onto the couch cross-legged, or just having a leg up, or just really cozy as you would do as with friends. So when I was looking at her chart, I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Well, that was fascinating. I loved this, where you were sharing her life and I got to dive deeper and to see how it all connects together. Let's see if we do it again.
We might have to, because this was actually really fun.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for listening. Do you have anything else you would like to add to this?
Yeah, if you haven't already and you love us, rate, review, subscribe, do all of the things wherever you watch, listen. That'd be greatly appreciated. Give a thumbs up, because apparently that's a good thing too. So please, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much, and hopefully hear you next time. Bye everyone.